Hey everybody. So I was thinking about doing a video and I came home and found a question that somebody had left for me asking my opinion of industrial music. And pardon me. The and what do I think of industrial music and do I like it and that sort of thing. And I was thinking about there's all these serious topics I want to do, but I feel like doing something fun. And so I'm going to talk about industrial music. The answer to the question, do I like it? Yes, I absolutely love it, and I always have. And there's and I've always loved the kind of the confluence between the acoustic, the artists that have a confluence between the acoustic sounds of industry and machinery and all of that, and actual musicality and musical instruments, especially. You, the person who's raising the question, you had asked me if I was, if I liked bands like Ministry. You said you liked early industrial, like Ministry and Skinny Puppy and all of that stuff. And I would actually challenge you to go back further than that. Look at bands. The original industrial act was Non, Non, which was founded by Boyd Rice, and he's the only consistent member. And it's his stuff when it came out came really out of nowhere and was built around the manipulation of tape loops and record loops and scratches long before hip hop and rap was doing it, and then acoustic manipulation and sound sampling, and it's really quite fascinating what happened, because he began entirely making noise, and from the layering and looping of that noise, melody and rhythm and meter and structure somehow began to emerge, and it's just really fascinating. I interviewed Boyd on this channel years ago, probably close to 10 years ago now. And he's a really cool guy, very controversial person, certainly, and he has always maintained this very harsh fascist aesthetic that has been very controversial. But anyway, he is the godfather of that sound. He is the originator of the industrial sound, and I would I would encourage you to go listen to the Non albums. Terra Incognita is one that if you're scared of the more intense stuff, that's like a mellower record. It's a compilation. I know Easy Listening for Iron Youth is a good compilation of the stuff. God and Beast and Receive the Flame are my two favorite Non records. Receive the Flame has a song on it called Solitude that's become like a staple of his, and then God and Beast has one of the original recordings of a piece he did called Total War. And so those are early industrial records, and he was one of the first artists to be identified as an industrial artist. And a lot of the people that were coming out of that same movement that he was coming out of, listened to Fad Gadget, FAD Gadget with Frank Tovey, and all of that was a forerunner of that sound. And then certainly the Residents were a forerunner of that sound as well. And what happened was, as the industrial genre started to I wouldn't say it took off, because it was very much an underground thing, but as it gained in popularity, Mitzi wants something. I don't know what she wants. What do you want? Hey, sweetie. But as the industrial genre took off, it went in a few different directions. One was the people who went just in the purely noise-based direction, and that was artists like Merzbow, who's a Japanese artist. Merzbow is incredible and just amazing, what he does. Then you had the more what became known as martial music or martial industrial music, and that was typified by bands like Von Thronstall and that kind of thing, and eventually that whole sound was co-opted into neo-folk, surprisingly, with Death in June and all of that. And then and a lot of the other early industrial stuff went in just a very experimental noise, ambient concept direction. One of the coolest examples of that is Nurse with Wound, and I've been getting into their stuff more recently. It's great ambient music when I'm trying to, I'm trying to focus, not focus. It's very jarring music, but when I'm trying to focus on creative ideas and that kind of thing, especially when I'm working on something really dark, it really gets me in the mood. They Nurse with Wound has so many, so many albums. It's hard to know where to begin, but A Sucked Orange is a really good one. The Lum's Sister is one I really like a lot. That's a more recent one. So it's always just so great because it's the music it's music that feels like you're outside of reality. It's like you've been pulled into this other dimension. Nurse with Wound. It's just one of the most wildly creative sounds, and it works. It's funny. It's not something that you would. I mean, he does concerts, and they do live concerts and everything, but it's really not something you would want to see live. It's something you would want to. It's something you just want to put on headphones and experience, or put on if you're fortunate enough to have like really high fidelity speakers and live where you can really blast it and not scare the neighbors. It's a really great experience. So that's some really early proto-industrial stuff that doesn't get talked about enough. So what you're asking about, though, the more song band oriented industrial sound, like that Nine Inch Nails popularized and everything, yeah, I absolutely love that. And from the bands you mentioned, Skinny Puppy I've not listened to that much. I've listened to some stuff. I've not heard enough to render an opinion one way or the other. I should listen to more of it. I am a absolutely huge Marilyn Manson fan. I'm an absolutely huge Nine Inch Nails fan, and I'm an absolutely huge Rammstein fan. So you mentioned all of those. Marilyn Manson, okay, Antichrist Superstar, Mechanical Animals, and Hollywood all came out while I was in high school. Nine Inch Nails, The Fragile, came out while I was in high school. That is one of my favorite records of all time. And Rammstein, Sehnsucht, came out when I was in high school, and it's the one with Du Hast on it. And so, yeah, those are just like defining albums of my life. Like anything that comes out when you're in high school is going to be epic for you. It's like I hated Better Than Ezra when I was a kid, but now I like, not that I like it, but when I hear them, it takes me back to that time in my life and everything. So I had a lot of stuff, there's a lot of stuff like that. My favorite industrial band of all time, bar none, is KMFDM. Now, The Fragile, I would say, is my favorite industrial album. And I love The Fragile. I mean, I could do an entire video analyzing The Fragile. It's incredible. I put it above The Downward Spiral. I mean, The Downward Spiral is legendary because it's got Hurt and it's got Closer and all of that. But it was the one that exploded Nine Inch Nails onto the scene. But I actually, it is a less important record by them for me. My favorite Nine Inch Nails album is The Fragile, followed by Pretty Hate Machine. But The Fragile, because that record is a journey, and there is so much of just this feeling. It doesn't feel like you're moving from song to song to song. It feels like you are traveling through this that you're traveling through this uh, strange, haunting Lynchian underworld of this kind of psychological journey. The first time I got that album, and I brought it home and I put it on in my room on my stereo in my room, like you do when you're a teenager. And I had, it was neat. So I had the house we were living in at the time had an extra room upstairs. So I had the room that was my like bedroom, and then I had my what I called my office, which is where my, study desk was and everything. And I went in there and I turned out all the lights and put it on my stereo, and um, I just put that album on, knowing nothing. I had heard I had heard them do the title track at the VMAs, and then I had heard "We're in This Together Now." Like as singles and as performances and that kind of thing. But other than that, I didn't know what to expect. And that journey that you go on in that album is extraordinary, and it is like nothing else. And obviously, as I said, I'm a tremendous Marilyn Manson fan. Antichrist Superstar is a journey, much the same. Um, but obviously you can see that Marilyn Manson was Trent Reznor's protege, because The Fragile is just something else entirely. And so yeah, the journey of it and the way in which, it's so, the music of it, the lyrical content is so evocative. I have, being on the spectrum, I experience synesthesia, which is that I'll see color patterns when I listen to music. And the color patterns that album creates are just extraordinary. Like, I have, when I've written music and I've worked on my own projects, I've, tried to separate those brilliant color patterns that I get from The Fragile away from the music itself, and try to create my own music that creates like similar color patterns and that kind of thing. And I've had, I would never say that I've had anything I've done. I'm humble enough to say, The Fragile is something I aspire to equal one day. And I've had moments of, flashes of that level of inspiration and everything, but to maintain that over a 2 CD album is just extraordinary, man. So yeah, The Fragile is one of my all-time favorite records. I saw Nine Inch Nails live on the With Teeth tour, and it was one of the, with Twiggy and everything else, and it was one of the best live shows I have ever seen. And the visual spectacle of it, the visual spectacle of what they do cannot be understated. And I'm not someone who is one of the, like grunge types where it's like, oh, it should just be guys standing on stage and their street clothes playing guitar. No, I want to see a spectacle. I want to see a show. I want to get, when I go to a concert, I want to see an intellectual monster truck rally, basically. I mean, I want a big bang up show. And that was one of the most incredible live shows I've ever seen. And I really do think that Trent, I mean, he strikes me as a neurodiverse person. And I really do think that Trent probably visualizes music the same way I do, because like watching that show and watching the way these like color washes would hit the screens, and the foreground hologram kind of stuff they were doing, it was just incredible. I mean, I was in a complete other realm. And so yeah, but getting back to my favorite industrial band is KMFDM. And that's because, first of all, I always feel like they bring something to it that a lot of industrial artists don't bring to the table, and that is fun. They're a fun band, and they have a good sense of humor, and they enjoy kicking your ass, and they're the band that, to me, most perfectly fits the title of the title of industrial metal, because they squarely fit the title of industrial metal and industrial rock very comfortably. Nine Inch Nails is industrial, yes, but Trent is off doing his own thing. He's in his own world. Uh, and Marilyn Manson started as industrial, but how many industrial records has Marilyn Manson really done? Because let's think about it. I mean, Portrait of an American Family is not an industrial album, it's a cock rock album. It has more in common with Wasp and that sort of thing than really anything Nine Inch Nails was doing or KMFDM was doing or anything like that. And Antichrist Superstar is definitely an industrial record, but with Mechanical Animals, he moved straight into glam rock, and it's like a Bowie-inspired glam rock, and there's industrial overtones. That kind of robotic feeling is still there, and it's implied in the title, but I don't think it's a straight up industrial album. He did the Hollywood was a return to the Antichrist Superstar album, our sound, that aesthetic, that sound, because people weren't satisfied with Mechanical Animals. So Hollywood was a return to that. But even Hollywood feels more like an alternative metal album to me. There's less of an emphasis on the sonic exploration aspect of it. And part of that's because they were just getting into their groove of what they wanted to do. Then, yes, I would say Golden Age of Grotesque is definitely a heavily industrial influenced album, or it is an industrial album, and it takes a very crucial piece of the puzzle into consideration, which is the German dance hall influence and how important. I mean, you have to remember, industrial as a formal genre came out of krautrock and German music and all of that. And so it was a very much a genre that that owes a lot to to traditional Germanic dance hall music and that sort of thing. And as a genre, it owes that, and Manson really tapped into that aspect of it with Golden Age of Grotesque. Now, of course, that's where the uninformed Ritualwood people of the world will start trying to accuse him of being a Nazi and all of that. No, Golden Age of Grotesque is not a Nazi album. Quite the opposite. The dandy culture that Manson was celebrating on Golden Age of Grotesque was something that was wiped out when the Nazis came to power. They did not like that. It was a very LGBT friend. Well, not that the T was part of it then, but it was very gay-friendly scene. It was a very libertine-oriented, decadent scene, and they did not like it at all, and they stomped it right out. But he goes back and does Golden Age of Grotesque really taps into that musically, and you can see from a harmonic standpoint, from an arrangement standpoint, like on a song like Dal Dugga Buzz Buzz Ziggity Zag, where John Five's guitar part is actually emulating a big band shout, and he gets to the solo and it's that da 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 da, and these are big band lines that he's copying for this arrangement. And so there's some really ingenious swing jazz stuff in there, and that sort of thing. What's interesting, at one point on one of the songs, on that song, on Dal Dugga Buzz Buzz Ziggity Zag, he says swing Heil, and he mentions swing Heil, and it's interesting, the swing Heil movement was something, it is a reference to a propaganda campaign that the Nazis undertook as they came to power, which was they started commissioning songwriters to write propaganda or write swing songs with propaganda in them, and because they were trying to get their message out to everybody by every means, even the means that they were going to completely shut down once they took power. And so there's actually a compilation. I don't know if it's still available. There used to be a box set compilation called Swing Heil that was about all of the it was a collection of all of these propaganda pieces that the Nazis did, and it's curious to think, especially if you look up, the Nazis actually blacklisted jazz from Germany while they were in power. So it's funny to think that they were uh, that they would be using that as a propaganda tool, but it did happen. Anyway, that's a side tangent. But talking about that, so after Golden Age of Grotesque, I don't think he's ever really had a true blue industrial album. I think they've been more, experimental noise rock albums, gothic albums, like Eat Me, Drink Me is just a goth record. It's very, very Bauhaus, very Dark Side of David Bowie kind of stuff and everything. And so, anyway, bringing it back around to KMFDM, what I love about KMFDM, like I said, Captain K's got such a great sense of humor and all of that. And there is so much variety. It's so funny because, in a way, on the one hand, they're known for being a band that has all of this, has this really strong conceptual continuity. They're going to be the band that you can reliably know what they're going to give you every time. And what's weird is, even knowing that, they still have all of these surprises throughout the album. And like I said, throughout their albums, and like I said, I love their attitude. I love that, it's like they're just grinning, mischievously. I love the vibe. And, but you hear all of these surprises and these things that you don't ever expect to see coming. So, like, listen to the album Tohu Vabohu, and it opens with this great advertisement where it's like, "What can KMFDM do for you?" And I love that because they promote themselves. They promote, how many bands say their name on an album. Metallica says their name on Kill 'Em All at one point. That's all I can think of. But KMFDM is constantly promoting themselves within their albums. So, but anyway, put on Tohu Vabohu, and when the first song kicks in, you get hit with like one of the sickest, dankest, dopest bass lines, slapping bass lines that you will ever hear. It is such a cool vibe, and I love that from KMFDM. I love that somehow they managed to do the same album every single time, but at the same time fill up every single album with things you never expected and never saw coming. It's like all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, here's a saxophone solo. Holy shit, here's backup singers doing 3-part harmony, like sounding like the Andrews Sisters or something like that. I mean, they are just the most fun, engaging, and consistently creative industrial band out there. So KMFDM, favorite albums by them, the aforementioned Tohu Vabohu, Kunst is a very recent album, but really good stuff. Money is a classic. The one that got me into them, the first album by KMFDM I ever owned, was Nile, or Nil, Nihl, Nil, and that's a classic. That has Juke Joint Jezebel, which is one of their signature songs and everything. So that's the one I would recommend. You mentioned Ministry. It's funny. So Ministry will have moments that I like, but I can't say that they have an album I like consistently from beginning to end. So they did, for example, a covers album called The Cover Up, that's got some really cool individual covers on it, like they did a really good cover of Under My Thumb, and that kind of thing. So they've got some cool stuff there. They did a song I really liked for they did a song I really liked for the Escape from LA soundtrack called Paisley, and it's a really cool ambient kind of. It's definitely, it sounds like it was definitely a B-side that they pulled out to put on the soundtrack, but it's just a very cool, lush sounding progression with these really great these really great guitar tones and everything. But I don't. I don't get into their albums all the way through. One thing I remember when I was in college was when Al Jorgensen started the whole his whole thing of like the anti-George Bush albums that he was doing and everything. And he did like 3 anti-Bush albums, and it's fine if he wants to do that, and I agree with his politics. I hated George W. Bush too. But it's the thing about those really, really political albums is it doesn't take me out of my life. Politics, the politics of the country I live in, are something I have to deal with. So it just doesn't take me out of the world that I already live in very effectively. And also, I'm not a big fan of his voice, to be honest with you. That just scratchy sounding voice that he has just doesn't work for me. What else? Rammstein. I love Rammstein. I would dispute with you, however, that Rammstein is an industrial band. They were the originators of a style of German heavy metal, techno heavy metal that really took off, called I forget how you pronounce it, but it's I forget the German phrase, but it means New German Hardness. And they started that sound and became very famous for that. And the reason I would dispute that they're a genre industrial band is because industrial by its nature requires an element of an intentional element of dissonance and abstract noise at different times. And that's part of what makes it industrial, because it sounds like you're in a factory. And I would dispute that they are an industrial band, because if you listen on their albums, they don't do a lot of dissonance. Everything is very consonant, everything is very harmonic, and it's geared towards a very melodic and listenable sound. So while there is some stylistic overlap, especially with the German aspect of their sound, and they are arguably the most German-sounding band that ever Germaned, arguably with that, there's some overlap, but I think there's something else, and I think they are very much their own thing. One thing I think not a lot of people have listened to, and Sehnsucht is my favorite Rammstein album, just like I said, because it came out when I was in high school. Then one thing not a lot of people have gotten into is Till Lindemann's solo project. He has a solo album career called Lindemann. And the first album, there may be more albums, but I know there's more than one. The first album is the only one I've listened to all the way through. That's called Skills and Pills. And the single on that was brilliant. It's called Praise Abort. And it was a really good song, really brilliant arrangement. And he does everything in English. And his lyrics are unbelievably juvenile and crass and grotesque, but it's such a creative sound, and it's such a cool vibe, and they really experimented nicely with the Rammstein sound, and I like that the experimentation happened outside of Rammstein, so that, it doesn't end up being one of those things where people get a totally different record and they get butthurt about it. So anyway, those are those bands. It's funny how I got into listening to industrial music, actually. So I was living in Mississippi, in small town Mississippi, when I was a kid, and very few cultural institutions penetrate all the way down to Mississippi from the popular culture. And so if you are famous in Mississippi, it's you've definitely arrived. You're definitely a big thing. When I saw Tool playing, and I haven't seen Tool. I mean, I saw that Tool played one time in Tupelo, Mississippi. I'm like, wow, okay, they really are big if they're drawing fans in Tupelo. But anyway, so I was living in Mississippi, and I had discovered Marilyn Manson, and I had discovered Nine Inch Nails, and that was about it. And bear in mind that, obviously this was in the dawning days of the internet, and it's not like it is now, where streaming services are just serving up new stuff for you to consume and get into. You watched what was on MTV, and that was about it. And you built your interests out of that. And this kid moved when I was in 10th grade. This kid moved into the school where, or moved to town and started going to school with me. And we got to be friends very quickly because I was into all kinds of rock and heavy metal and different stuff. And he was definitely a kindred spirit in that regard. And he had had an actual band when he was, like in the old city that he had moved from or something. He had had an actual band that had been out performing. And he he told me he was very boastful. I don't want to call him out by name, but he was very boastful, and he told me that he had an album coming out, and Joshua Silver from Typo Negative was going to be producing it, and all of this stuff, and that he had a deal on the table from Interscope Records and stuff like that. I don't know how true any of that was. I think it was mostly hot air, but and I have not seen him or heard from him in a very long time because I don't want to hold it against him too much because it's high school and everybody's growing up, but he was kind of a toxic friend for a lot of reasons, so I just had to let him go, or at least not continue the contact after I moved away. But anyway, he though was instrumental in making me aware of a lot of the bands that would become so important to me and important to all of us. He worshipped at the altar of Trent Reznor and Marilyn Manson like I did, but he was also he was the one that turned me on to Typo Negative. I was not familiar with Typo Negative before then. He turned me on to them. He turned me on to Drain STH, which is an amazing band, and they broke up far too soon. Their first album, Horror Wrestling, that's HORROR, Horror Wrestling, is phenomenal. They're like a female Alice in Chains. But he turned me on to all of that stuff, and he was going over to his house. He had he had all this home studio gear long before that was commonly available and everything, and he had he had Pro Tools, I think, or some DAW long before it was commonplace for people to have all that. And I was just fascinated by the mad scientist aspect of all of it. And I've got his album that he made somewhere, and it's it's funny. It's so weird because it's one of those things where it's not good, but it's so charming. It's like, just because it's like something a kid made, and it sounds like an industrial album that a talented but not very matured young teenage artist creator came up with. And it's just, I've got it somewhere, and I remember listening to that thing. I remember being so jealous of him because he was like a few steps ahead of me, and in everything. And yeah, it was just so cool. Though that getting kind of that's really where I caught the bug for a lot of the stuff that I've been doing over the years. The home studio projects and everything all came from that. So anyway, well, that was a fun video to do, and certainly nice to have a break from all of the bullshit that's going on in the world. But to answer your question, yes, I do like a lot of I love industrial music, always have, and I'm sure there's a lot of newer stuff coming out lately that I've not listened to and I've not heard, because I think the stodgy old man, crotchety old man aspect kicks in after a while, and it's like, well, the new stuff's just not as good as what was going on back in the day and everything. But yeah, there's a lot of great industrial that I like. So anyway, hope that answers your question, and have a nice night.